At my grandson's birthday party, my son handed me a cheap old scarf and said, "Cover your wrinkled face, don't embarrass the family." His wife and her relatives burst into laughter. But when they brought out the cake, I stood up and made an announcement about a gift for my grandson that made my son's hands shake. My name is Eleanor Matthews. I'm 72 years old. The sound of crackling logs in the fireplace, the ticking of the old grandfather clock. Today, my grandson Tommy is turning 10. 10 years old. It feels like yesterday I was holding that tiny, crying bundle in my arms while my son Richard looked at him with such bewildered, frightened joy. Now Tommy is a tall boy with his father's eyes and my smile. The morning began long before dawn. I love this time when the house is still sleeping, wrapped in silence and coolness. The air in the living room smells of yesterday's apple pie and the dying embers from the fireplace. I walk to the kitchen, stepping on the familiar creaking floorboards. This house is my entire life. My late husband George and I didn't build it just for ourselves. We built it for the future. For Richard, and then, as it turned out, for his family too. Every board, every nail here remembers the warmth of our hands. I took out the flour. For Tommy's birthday, I always bake meat pies, potato pies, and his favorite apple cinnamon ones. The dough comes alive in my hands, becomes warm and pliable. It's a kind of magic, the only thing I still have control over. While I shaped one pie after another, memories flooded back. There's Richard as a little boy, his nose covered in flour, trying to help. There's George, my husband, coming in from the cold, shaking snow off his cap and reaching for a hot pie, burning his fingers. And there I am, sitting alone at this same table, transferring the last of George's pension to the family business account. This business is a small trucking company that Richard opened 5 years ago. Opened with my money. Everything I had from selling our city apartment after George died. "Mom, this is our shared future," he said then, passionately, convincingly. "You'll live with us in a big house, in fresh air, and I'll build an empire." The empire hasn't been built yet, but the debts have. Every month I sit at George's old desk, open a thick notebook with a checkered cover, and tally up the expenses. Utility bills for the huge house. Groceries for 4 people. Car expenses and the unchanging line, business support. Sometimes 20,000, sometimes 50. I didn't ask what it was for exactly. I trusted. A mother always trusts her child, even when he's no longer a child but a 38-year-old man. Yawning, my daughter-in-law Jessica entered the kitchen. She glanced at me with lazy disdain and wrinkled her perfect nose. "Again with your old-fashioned pies, Eleanor. Who eats this stuff nowadays? This is so last century. We should have ordered trendy cupcakes, tarts, so we wouldn't be embarrassed in front of the guests." She poured herself filtered water and left, leaving behind a trail of expensive perfume and slight coldness. I said nothing. I've long since stopped responding. Why bother? Words bounce off her like peas off a wall. Her world consists of fashionable things, expensive resorts, and status acquaintances. In this world, there's no place for my pies, my gray hair, or my wrinkles. I was as much of a relic as my cooking. A useful but shameful leftover, a person who pays the bills and watches the house while they live their full lives. By evening, guests had arrived. Mostly Jessica's relatives and friends. Loud, self-confident people who examined my house with condescending benevolence of owners. They praised the renovation Jessica had done in the living room. Cold, faceless, in gray tones. They loudly discussed where they'd go for the Christmas holidays. I felt like a servant at someone else's party, a free addition to my own home. Tommy was happy. He unwrapped gifts, his eyes shining. A huge construction set, a new tablet, a remote-controlled helicopter. I gave him a good, expensive encyclopedia about space. He had dreamed about it for a long time. He hugged me so tight it took my breath away. Thank you, Grandma, you're the best. In that moment, I was ready to forgive everything. All the sideways glances, all the cutting remarks. Everything for this minute, for this pure, sincere childhood happiness. Then came time for toasts, and Richard, my son, stood up with a glass. He looked a bit tense, as if preparing for something. He said a few warm words about Tommy, then turned to me. We have gifts for everyone here, he said in an unnaturally loud voice, attracting everyone's attention. And we have something for our mom too. He handed me a small package, carelessly wrapped in cheap paper. I took it. Inside a cheap cardboard box lay a scarf. Dull, gray-brown, made of some unpleasant synthetic material, the kind sold at market stalls for pennies. I looked up at my son in bewilderment. Richard wouldn't look me in the eyes. His gaze was fixed somewhere to the side, on Jessica, who was watching him with an encouraging smile. And then he spoke the words that stopped time. Here, Mom, put it on. Cover your old face, don't embarrass the family in front of the guests. He didn't say it in a whisper. He said it loudly, clearly, so everyone could hear. So Jessica's smug relatives could hear, so my 10-year-old grandson could hear. There was silence. Brief, deafening silence. Then I saw them. The smiles. Not loud laughs, but sharp as glass shards. Jessica smiled triumphantly. Her mother, a plump, well-groomed woman, covered her mouth with her hand, but her eyes were laughing. Her cousin nodded approvingly. They all looked at me with the same expression of disgusted superiority. In that moment, the world fell silent for me. All the noise, laughter, conversations, clinking of glasses disappeared. Only ringing emptiness remained, and this gallery of faces. My son's face, avoiding my gaze. My daughter-in-law's face, full of malicious joy. Her relatives' faces, enjoying my humiliation. I didn't feel pain. No tears welled up, no offense flared. No. Something deep inside my chest clicked. Not with a creak, not with pain, but clearly, coldly, and finally. Like the shutter of an expensive camera, forever capturing a single frame. A frame that made everything clear, their attitudes, my place, my future in this house that I built. In that instant, my blind maternal love died. Hope died. Eleanor, the compliant, understanding, and forgiving mom and grandmother died. And another woman was born. Calm, cold, and absolutely clear-sighted. I sat with that ugly scarf on my knees while the world slowly returned around me. Sounds emerged again. Someone coughed nervously, a fork clinked against a plate. But the silence inside me didn't pass. It just became different. Dense, heavy, like water at great depth. I looked at my hands lying on my knees. All my life these hands had done something. Kneaded dough, washed diapers, weeded gardens, counted money to make ends meet. They built this house, they gave, and now they were handed this cheap, slippery piece of synthetic to cover an old face. So this was it. My worth. This was the sum of my life, my sacrifices, my love. I was an annoying hindrance, a wallet that should be invisible. A ghost in my own house, reeking of mothballs and shame. Suddenly I saw everything with stunning, icy clarity. Every hint, every eye roll from Jessica, every request from Richard to understand and help a little more. None of it was accidental. These were steps on a staircase leading to this very moment, to this scarf. They had slowly, year after year, erased me, removed my personality, leaving only a convenient function. And now they decided the function was complete and could be disposed of, covered with a rag like old furniture. My gaze slid across the room and stopped on Tommy. He sat at the table, a bit confused by the general awkwardness, picking at his salad with a fork. The only clean, bright person in this room filled with poison. He didn't understand his grandfather's words, but he sensed something bad, wrong had happened. In his confused eyes, I saw not my past, but his future. What future awaits him with a father who so easily betrays his own mother and a mother who applauds this? What will they teach him? The same consumerism, the same cruelty wrapped in fake smiles. They'll mold him into someone like themselves, a person for whom nothing is sacred except money and status. No. This must not happen. At that moment, Jessica, recovering from her momentary triumph and wanting to smooth over the awkwardness, entered the room with a festive cake. 10 candles burned on it with bright, trembling flames. "And here's our birthday boy. Tommy, make a wish," she sang, placing the cake in front of my grandson. The guests perked up, clapped, and began singing "Happy Birthday." Their voices sounded distant to me, as if coming from far away. I watched the candle flames, their reflection in my grandson's eyes. And while they sang, a decision finally matured within me. Not angry, not vengeful, but calm, measured, and absolutely unshakable. The song ended. Tommy, taking a deep breath, blew out all the candles in one go. The room exploded in applause again. Richard took the knife to cut the cake. His face was already benevolent again. He apparently decided the incident was over. Mother had swallowed the insult, as she'd swallowed everything before. And then I stood up. All eyes immediately turned to me. They probably expected me to burst into tears or start reproaching. Jessica looked defiant. Richard frowned. I surveyed everyone with a calm, attentive gaze. My voice, when I spoke, surprised even myself. It was even, firm, and completely devoid of emotion. I also have a gift for Tommy. A gift for his future. Silence hung in the room again. I looked at my grandson. Tommy, once Grandpa George and I built this house. We built it for our family, for the future. Today, on your 10th birthday, I want your future to have a solid foundation. I paused, letting the words settle. I'm giving you this house, the entire property with all the land and buildings. I'll process all the documents and place the property in a trust in your name. When you turn 21, you'll become its rightful owner. Dead silence. I saw faces stretch in shock. Jessica froze with her mouth half open. Her face changed from triumphant to bewildered, then confused. I continued, now looking directly at Richard. But a house is just walls. So that your trust fund, Tommy, has means for your education, your development, your life until you come of age, I've made another decision. I'm liquidating my share in our family business. All proceeds from selling my half of the assets will go into your trust fund. Now the silence became ringing. I saw Richard go pale. The knife in his hand trembled. Not much. But I noticed this brief, small tremor that gave him away completely. He knew the true state of affairs. He knew this house was the only real valuable asset they had, that the business stayed afloat only thanks to my constant injections. But I saw something else in his eyes. He didn't believe me. He decided this was just hysteria. A dramatic gesture from an offended old woman. An empty threat to attract attention. I calmly sat back down, took a napkin from the table, and politely said into the general emptiness, "Cut the cake, it might melt." The evening ended quickly and awkwardly. Guests, mumbling something, hastily said goodbye and left. Richard and Jessica pretended nothing had happened, but their cheerfulness was strained and false. They didn't say a word to me, no reproach, no question. They simply ignored me, deciding that by morning everything would return to normal. Late at night, when the house finally fell quiet, I sat in my room. On the nightstand lay that same scarf. I looked at it not with offense, but with gratitude. It had become the stone that caused the avalanche. It opened my eyes. I picked up my phone. In my address book weren't many numbers. I found the one I needed. My fingers didn't tremble. My chest was cold and calm. The rings didn't last long. "Hello?" came the familiar, slightly sharp voice of Patricia, my late husband's sister. "Patricia, hello. It's Eleanor." "Hello, Eleanor. Something wrong? Your voice sounds strange." I smiled to myself. She always knew how to hear what was hidden. "Everything's fine, Patricia. Better than it was. I need your advice. And a good lawyer. A very good one. Tomorrow morning." The night. I slept without dreams. Deeply and peacefully, as I probably hadn't slept for many years. For the first time in a long while, I woke not with the familiar heaviness in my chest, but with a feeling of emptiness. But this wasn't bitter, painful emptiness of loss, but clean, clear like frosty air. As if from a room where junk had accumulated for years, all the furniture was finally carried out. Now there was an echo, and you could see how much light and space there really was. They came downstairs around 10. Richard and Jessica. They walked together, as if preparing for an important diplomatic visit. Their faces wore strained smiles, condescending, slightly tired, like wise adults about to reason with a capricious child. They approached my table. Jessica sat in the chair opposite, placing her manicured hands on the table. "Good morning, Mom," she began in an artificially soft, soothing voice. The voice used with the sick or those not considered equals. "We got a bit overexcited yesterday. You said such things." It was a very theatrical statement. I silently sipped my coffee. It was burning hot, and this bitterness in my mouth pleasantly sobered me. Richard coughed, shifting from foot to foot. This role was harder for him. "Mom, we understand you were upset. That scarf. I didn't think. It came out stupid. Sorry. But let's be realistic. Some trusts, liquidations, these are just words said in anger." I continued to be silent, looking out the window. I saw their reflection in the glass. Two worried figures leaning over me. "Eleanor," Jessica spoke again, and steel notes of impatience rang in her voice. "This house is our shared nest. We put so much effort into it, did renovations. And the business, that's Richard's, that's his future, Tommy's future. You can't just take and destroy everything because of momentary offense. We're family." Family. What a strange, foreign word. I looked at them, at my son who was hiding his eyes, and at his wife who spoke of the nest I built and maintained as her own property. They spoke to me like an unreasonable child who threw a tantrum in a toy store because they weren't bought candy. They explained to me why my decisions about my own property were unrealistic. They didn't ask, they didn't try to understand, they lectured. I finished my coffee, put the cup on the saucer. It clinked with a quiet, distinct sound. I stood up. "I need to go to the garden," I said in an even voice, not looking at them. "The peonies need tying up." And I left. That afternoon I sat on the porch with a book. The house was quiet. Richard had left supposedly on business. Jessica sat upstairs in their bedroom. At some point, the silence was broken by her voice, loud and irritated. She was talking on the phone. "The walls in this house are thick, but rage, like water, finds cracks. Richard, what nonsense is going on?" she almost screamed into the phone. "I'm trying to make a down payment for the cherry car." "Yes, that one. I found the perfect option, and they write, transaction declined." Pause. I turned the page, though I couldn't see the letters. What do you mean check the balance? I checked. What do you mean insufficient funds? This is our premium account. Your salary just came in yesterday. I imagined her face. Distorted, angry. This car had been her dream for months. A symbol of their success, their new level. A celebratory purchase, as she boasted to her friend yesterday, in honor of starting a new life. No, the card's right here in front of me. Her voice became higher and shriller. Then what? The bank. Why would the bank? She paused. Wait. A long, ringing pause followed. I knew what was happening in her head. Little gears of vanity and suspicion turned and clicked into place. It's her, Jessica shrieked. Definitely her. The old witch blocked the card or called the bank and spun some story. I told you we couldn't leave her like this. We should have taken measures right away. And you kept saying Mom, Mom. She's taking petty revenge like the old hag she is. I closed my book, got up, and went into the house to make tea. I heard her continue screaming into the phone, promising to sort things out and put me in my place. They decided I had stolen their candy, that I was playing their game of petty tricks, grievances, and manipulations. They couldn't even imagine that I was no longer playing, that I had left the game. They thought I had taken one chess piece from the table, while I was silently overturning the entire chessboard. I made tea, and my soul was calm. Their panic, their anger, their complete misunderstanding of the situation were the best confirmation that I had done everything right. Every step they took, every word only strengthened my conviction. And I knew this was only the first, smallest ripple on the water. The real storm was still ahead. The next morning I got dressed and went to the city. Richard and Jessica saw me off with looks full of mute reproach and suspicion. They apparently decided I was going to the bank to continue my petty mischief. Let them think that. Their world had narrowed to one blocked credit card. They couldn't imagine where I was really going. Patricia had given me the address of a law office in the old downtown. The office was located in a solid pre-war building with high ceilings and quiet corridors. The lawyer himself, Andrew, turned out to be a man of about 50 with attentive, calm eyes and gray at his temples. He didn't ask unnecessary questions, just listened. I sat in a deep leather chair opposite his massive oak desk and methodically, without emotion, laid out the essence of the matter. I told him about the house, which was completely registered to me, about the business where I was a co-founder with a 50% share. About my desire to create a trust fund for my grandson and liquidate my share in the company for this purpose. I spoke, and he made notes in a notebook, occasionally nodding. Eleanor, I understand you, he said when I finished. The situation is clear, the action plan too. To begin the procedure, I need all founding documents for the company and financial reports for the last year. The more complete the document package, the faster we can launch everything. I was ready for this. Over the years, I had gotten used to order. At home, in my old chest of drawers, I had a separate folder where I kept everything related to the family business. All contracts, all statements, all receipts for my transfers. I kept them not out of distrust, but simply out of habit instilled by my father, an accountant. Money loves counting and documents love order, he used to say. I handed Andrew the thick folder. He put on his glasses and began methodically studying its contents, sheet by sheet. The office was filled with silence, broken only by the rustling of papers. I looked out the window at the clouds floating across the sky and felt strangely calm. I was in the right place. I was doing what I should. About 20 minutes passed. Andrew was silent, only occasionally frowning and underlining something with a pencil. Then he stopped at one of the last bank reports. He peered at it for a long time, then took off his glasses and looked at me over them. Eleanor, I have a question for you. Here, 3 weeks ago, a very large sum came into the company account, almost $3 million. Was this some new investor or did you sell part of the assets? I looked at him uncomprehendingly. 3 million. No, there were no investors, and we didn't sell anything. I would have known. Strange, he put his glasses back on and moved the document toward me, pointing to a line with his finger. Look here. Credit installment from financial guarantor. Do you know such an organization? I peered at the line. The name meant nothing to me. No, I'd never heard of it. We always got credit from the same large bank, and only small amounts for working capital. The lawyer's face became serious. He leaned back in his chair. Financial guarantor isn't a bank. It's a microcredit organization for business. They give large sums at very high interest rates with draconian penalties for late payment. People only deal with them in the most desperate situations. Tell me, did your son tell you he was planning to take such a large loan? No, not a word. The chill I had first felt at my grandson's birthday party was born again somewhere deep in my chest, but now it was different, alarming. Andrew fell silent, flipping through the papers further. His finger stopped on the last page of the report. And this is even more interesting, he said quietly. This $3 million stayed in the company account for less than 24 hours and the next day was transferred in full to a personal account. Wait. The personal account of your daughter-in-law, Jessica Patricia Matthews. Payment purpose, payment under interest-free loan agreement. The air in the office became thick. I looked at the lawyer but saw Jessica's face before me, her triumphant smile that evening, her screams on the phone about buying a new cherry car. Eleanor, to get such a loan requires the consent and signature of all founders, including yours. Did you sign any credit agreements in the last month? No. My voice sounded hollow. Nothing. Andrew got up, went to the cabinet, and took out a thin folder. As I thought. When Patricia contacted me, with her consent I made a preliminary inquiry in the registry for the legal entity. Here's a copy of the credit agreement with financial guarantor. He opened the folder and placed it in front of me. On the last page in the Founder 2 field was a signature. My signature, or rather, something very similar, but somehow uncertain, clumsy. As if a foreign hand had carefully traced it, looking at a sample. I looked at this forged signature, and the picture came together. Not just came together, it burned me with its cynical, ugly completeness. They weren't just living at my expense, they weren't just disrespecting me, they were preparing a trap for me. The plan was simple and monstrous. Take a huge loan on the company using my forged signature. Quickly withdraw the money to their personal account, buy a new car with it. Maybe make a down payment on an apartment in another city. And then just abandon everything. Leave the company with a gigantic debt at impossible interest rates. And this debt, as a co-founder, I would have to pay from my pension, selling this house. The only thing I had left, they were planning not just to leave. They were planning to leave me destitute, in ruins, with shame and a debt pit in my old age. That scarf Richard gave me wasn't just a cruel joke, it was a farewell gift. A symbolic gesture. Cover your face, Mom, you'll be very ashamed soon. Disappear. In that moment, the last thing that was still smoldering in me died. The last ember of maternal feeling, pity, doubt. Everything burned out to ash. Only cold, hard as granite peace remained. I raised my eyes to the lawyer. Andrew, I said in a voice that had neither tremor nor tears. Make a copy of this agreement and start the procedure. But now not just liquidation of the share, complete liquidation of the partnership with forced audit of all financial operations for the last year. And prepare official notifications for my son and for the bank where we have all our accounts open. He nodded silently. He understood everything without unnecessary words. I left his office a different person. The woman who entered there an hour ago could still doubt, feel sorry. The woman who left was going to execute a sentence. I returned home in the evening. The air in the house was heavy, electrified. Jessica demonstratively wasn't talking to me, just throwing short angry glances in my direction. Richard tried to portray carefreeness, talked loudly on the phone about some promising deals, but I saw how tense the line of his shoulders was. They were waiting. Waiting for me to apologize, give up, ask forgiveness for my hysteria. They were still living in their world where I was just a secondary character in their play. I silently went to my room. I had nothing to say to them. All words had already been said there, in the quiet lawyer's office. Now documents would do the talking. For 2 days, Cold War reigned in the house. They demonstratively ordered pizza and sushi delivery, leaving mountains of boxes in the kitchen. They talked to each other as if I didn't exist. I lived my own life, tended the garden, read, cooked simple food for myself. Inside me was silence. I felt neither anger nor triumph, only cold, calm expectation. I knew the mechanism was launched, and now nothing could stop it. And then, on the 3rd day after my visit to the lawyer, it happened. I was watering roses by the porch when a small courier van pulled up to the gate. A young man in a uniform jacket got out. "For Richard Matthews," he said, checking his tablet. "Need a signature for receipt." At that moment, Jessica came out of the house. She had apparently seen the car from the window. Her face showed impatient curiosity. Maybe these are documents for her new car. "I'm his wife, I can sign," she said businesslike, extending her hand. The courier handed her 2 thick white envelopes and a tablet. She carelessly scribbled a signature and, not waiting for him to leave, impatiently tore open the first envelope. I continued cutting withered rose buds. I wasn't looking at her, but with peripheral vision I saw everything. I saw how her fingers with expensive manicure tore the thick paper, how she pulled out a sheet folded several times, how her eyes began to dart across the lines. At first her face showed bewilderment. She apparently expected to see something different. Then her eyebrows came together at the bridge of her nose. She turned the sheet over, returned to the beginning again. And I saw how her face changed. Slowly but inevitably. As if under the thin layer of makeup and self-confidence, a completely different essence was emerging. Color drained from her cheeks. The blush she so carefully applied every morning disappeared, leaving behind deathly pale chalk whiteness. Her lips, always slightly petulantly pursed, opened in mute amazement. She silently opened the second envelope. This one was from their main bank. The letter was shorter. She ran through it with her eyes in a few seconds, and her face turned into a mask of horror. The envelopes fell from her weakened fingers and glided onto the porch steps. "Richard." Her voice wasn't a scream, but some kind of hoarse, strangled wheeze. "Richard, come here quickly." The door flew open and Richard ran out onto the porch. "What happened? What's all the screaming about?" he began irritably, but seeing his wife's face, he stopped short. "What is this?" she whispered, pointing at the papers lying on the floor. Richard frowned, picked up the first sheet. I saw his profile. At first, a condescending smirk. He probably thought it was another chain letter from some advertising agency. But then the smirk slid off his face. He began to read. His eyes widened. He gripped the paper so hard his knuckles turned white. His bravado, his feigned confidence, all of it crumbled off him like plaster from an old wall. I saw how those terrible official words danced before his eyes, words I now knew by heart. Notice of intention to terminate partnership agreement, force liquidation of assets, full judicial accounting audit. Initiation of lawsuit. He snatched the second sheet. Bank notification. Short and merciless. In connection with receiving information about possible fraudulent actions by one of the founders, based on Clause 7.4 of the credit agreement, all credit lines and overdraft on Mtrans LLC accounts are frozen until the end of internal investigation. He stood holding these 2 sheets of paper and breathing heavily. Air entered his lungs with a whistle. Condescension disappeared. Irritation disappeared. Only pure, primal animal fear remained. The panic of a person who was running a marathon, confident in victory, and one step from the finish line suddenly discovered he had been running the wrong way, and now awaiting him was not a podium, but an abyss. He raised his eyes to me. There wasn't a drop of the condescension with which he had looked at me 3 days ago. There was horror and incomprehension of how this was possible. This couldn't be. It was just old lady hysteria, just offense, just a stupid scarf. This couldn't have led to this. Mom, he whispered. What? What is this? I silently put down the pruning shears, straightened up, and looked him directly in the eyes. Calmly and firmly. This isn't hysteria, Richard, I said in an even voice. This isn't offense, this isn't petty revenge. I paused, letting him comprehend my words. This is execution. Legal execution. Jessica made some strange sobbing sound. She looked at me, then at her husband, then at the papers in his hands. Horror splashed in her eyes. It finally dawned on her. This wasn't a game, this was war, and they had already lost. The silence that hung after my words didn't last long. It was just the calm before the storm. I saw how the fear in Richard's eyes was replaced by anger, the last refuge of a cornered beast. He crumpled the papers in his fists and stepped toward me. Jessica, snapping out of her stupor, followed him. They didn't go to the living room. They burst into my room, into my only personal space in this house. I sat in the old armchair by the window, and they stood over me like 2 storm clouds. What have you done? Richard began. His voice was breaking with rage. He threw the crumpled sheets onto the small table next to me. Have you lost your mind, old woman? Decided to destroy everything. Destroy me, your only son. I was silent. I just looked at him, at his face distorted with anger, at the vein swelling on his neck. I didn't see an adult man. I saw a frightened boy whose favorite toy had been taken away. Behind him, Jessica began her performance. She covered her face with her hands and burst into loud, theatrical, heartbreaking sobs. These weren't tears of grief, but tears of rage and helplessness. Our house, our business, Tommy's future, she wailed through her sobs. How could you? Don't you have a heart? You're a grandmother. Do you want your grandson to beg on the streets, for us to end up homeless? Why such cruelty? This was a storm. A hurricane of accusations, reproaches, and emotional blackmail. They worked as a pair, like a well-rehearsed duet. He pressed on filial duty and my guilt. She pressed on the grandson's future, on family values. The same values they themselves had trampled several days ago. I worked for you my whole life, Richard shouted, waving his arms. Tried to build something so you could live comfortably, so everyone would have everything. And you crossed out everything with one stroke of the pen because of some stupid scarf, because of senile dementia. He stopped to catch his breath, and Jessica immediately stepped in. We sheltered you in our home, took care of you, and this is how you repay us, with black ingratitude. You're just a spiteful, evil old woman who hates our happiness. In our home. These words hit me for a moment, in the house I built, for which I paid. But the pain was no longer sharp. It was just a dull, familiar echo of the past. They shouted for a long time, spilling out everything, their offense, their fear, their anger. They blamed me for everything, for their incompetence, their debts, their problems. I was a convenient target. In their picture of the world, I was to blame, not their greed, not their weakness, not their vileness. I sat and waited. I was like a rock against which waves beat. They make noise, foam, unleash all their fury on it, but the rock stands. It just waits for the storm to subside. And I knew it would subside. They didn't have an endless supply of strength. And that moment came. Richard grew hoarse. His rage was exhausted. Only heavy, exhausted panting remained. Jessica stopped sobbing and now only quietly, convulsively hiccuped, occasionally glancing at me to assess the effect. They were spent. The room was again filled with silence, saturated with the smell of their anger and my calm. I waited another minute, then slowly, without a single unnecessary movement, leaned down and took out from the table drawer one single sheet of paper, the copy Andrew had made for me. I placed it on the table in front of them, right on the crumpled notification. Richard looked at the sheet with bewilderment. Jessica stopped hiccuping and curiously craned her neck. Richard extended his hand and took the paper, smoothed it out. I saw how his eyes ran over the familiar official lines of the credit agreement. He still didn't understand. He probably thought this was another document from the same series. And then his gaze fell on the last page, on the Founder 2 field. On the signature. I saw how the last drop of blood drained from his face. He froze, staring at this forged, clumsy scribble that was supposed to become my sentence. His shoulders sagged, the paper fell from his fingers and slowly glided to the carpet. Jessica, understanding nothing, bent down and picked up the sheet. She peered at it. Her eyes widened. She looked from the signature to me, then back to the signature. There was no remorse in her eyes. There was animal terror at being caught. And then I spoke quietly, almost in a whisper, but in this deafening silence my voice sounded like the toll of a bell. You screamed about everything we did for you. I looked directly into my son's eyes. Did you mean everything you did to me? Silence. Absolute, dead silence. They had no words. All their accusations, all their screams, all their tears, everything shattered against this one single sheet of paper. Their carefully constructed drama about an ungrateful mother collapsed, exposing the ugly truth of their own betrayal. They looked at me, and for the first time in many years they truly saw me. Not as a servant, not as a wallet, not as an old, capricious mother. They saw a person who knew everything about them, who held proof of their crime in her hands. At that moment I understood that all the power was mine. And this wasn't the power of revenge, this was the power of truth, and it was crushing. After that scene in my room, the house plunged into strange, viscous silence. They no longer shouted. They lurked, walked through the house like shadows, spoke in whispers. Their fear was almost tangible. But I knew this wasn't the end. A cornered beast doesn't surrender. It prepares for one last desperate leap. I didn't know what form it would take, but I was sure they would try something. Their last attempt turned out to be even lower and more cynical than I could have imagined. 2 days later, on Saturday, Jessica approached me with an unnaturally humble, sad face. Eleanor, she said in a quiet, respectful voice I had never heard from her. We're very worried about you, about your condition. We understand you're not doing all this out of malice. We invited my parents and uncle over this evening just to talk as a family, to find a way out of this terrible situation. Please don't refuse. A family council. I immediately understood what kind of council this was and what my role would be. This was their last, dirtiest card. They were going to stage a performance where I was a demented, inadequate old woman who had fallen under bad influence and was destroying her own family. They were the unfortunate, loving children trying to save both me and themselves. I calmly nodded. Fine, I'll be there. Her eyes flashed with triumph for a moment. She was sure I had fallen into their trap. That evening, their tribunal gathered in the living room. Jessica's parents arrived, her mother, a plump woman glistening with smugness, and her father, a stern man with a heavy gaze who always looked at me like I was empty space. Her uncle also came, some mid-level local official who radiated power and self-confidence. They seated me in an armchair in the center of the room. They arranged themselves around me, creating a tight circle. The atmosphere was like an interrogation. Richard began. He spoke in a strangled voice full of grief. He talked about how I had always been a wonderful mother, but lately I hadn't been like myself, how I'd become withdrawn, suspicious, how I was making irrational decisions. He didn't mention the scarf or his words. Instead, he painted a picture of my slow decline. Then Jessica spoke. She cried, this time quietly and convincingly. She told how she and Richard were afraid for me, how my actions threatened their son's future, my grandson's future. She mentioned Patricia. She's an envious, lonely woman who always disliked us and now manipulates an elderly person. She hinted at the need for guardianship, that I needed to be protected from myself. Their relatives listened, nodding sympathetically. Jessica's mother agreed, yes, elderly people have this confusion of mind. Poor you, our children, what a cross has fallen on you. The uncle frowned and proclaimed something like, yes, measures need to be taken here. Can't let it slide. I sat and was silent. I watched this circus with cold detachment. They played their roles, confident of success. They were in their element, surrounded by their people, and thought I was alone against them all. Jessica's father, Igor, turned to me. Eleanor, he said in a heavy, mentoring tone. You must understand, the children only wish you well. Maybe you should rest, go to a good nursing home, get treatment, and they'll sort out the affairs themselves. At that very moment, when their victory seemed so close to them, the living room door quietly opened. Patricia stood on the threshold. In her hand she held a thick folder. Good evening, she said in her usual, slightly sharp voice. Sorry for the intrusion. I heard you have a family financial counsel here. Didn't want to interfere. Richard and Jessica froze. Their faces stretched. They hadn't expected this. Patricia calmly entered the room, approached the large dining table, and placed her folder on it. I'm very timely, she continued, surveying all the gathered with a sharp, piercing gaze. I'm an accountant auditor by profession, though retired. And when my sister-in-law Eleanor asked me for advice, I couldn't, as you understand, stay aside. I took the liberty of preparing a small report so everyone would understand better what we're talking about. She opened the folder. From it she extracted several printouts clipped together. Let's start with the simple. She placed the first sheet on the table. This is a summary statement of all money transfers from Eleanor's accounts to M-Trans LLC accounts over the last 5 years. The total amount, as you can see, is $742,000. This doesn't count her pension, which went entirely to maintaining this house. She paused. Deathly silence reigned in the room. And here on the table is the second document. This is a statement of main expenses from the corporate accounts. Resort trips, restaurants, expensive clothing purchases, 2 cars for Jessica. I won't bore you with details. I'll just say that less than 30% went to production needs. Jessica's mother's face began to slowly turn crimson. The uncle stopped looking self-confident and now watched his niece with undisguised interest. And the cherry on top. Patricia took out the last document, a copy of that same credit agreement. Here's a very interesting document. A loan for $3 million, taken 3 weeks ago with the entire business as collateral. Signed, as you can see, by both founders. Here's Richard's signature. And here, she tapped her nail on the second signature, supposedly Eleanor's signature. Only there's one discrepancy. On the day this agreement was signed, Eleanor was at a sanatorium near Buffalo, where she goes every year. I have the voucher, tickets, and extract from the registration log. So this signature, as they say in certain circles, is subject to very interesting expertise. Article 159 of the Criminal Code. Fraud in especially large amounts, committed by a group of persons by prior conspiracy. She fell silent. And in this silence, the words, Criminal Code, sounded like a gunshot. Jessica sat white as a sheet. Richard stared at the floor. His neck turned crimson. Igor, Jessica's father, slowly rose. He was terrible in his silent rage. He approached the table, took the copy of the agreement in his hands, peered at it. Then he looked at his daughter. This was a look full of such icy contempt and shame that I felt almost sorry for her for a moment. You have disgraced our family, he said quietly, but so that everyone heard. You brought shame on my name. He turned and, without saying another word, headed for the exit. His wife and brother, stumbling, hurried after him. The humiliation was complete, public, and final. They wanted to arrange a tribunal for me and found themselves on the scaffold of their own shame. When the door closed behind them, Richard and Jessica remained sitting in the middle of the living room in complete, deafening silence. Their world had collapsed not in an instant, but slowly, inevitably. And now they sat among its ruins. That evening they said not another word to me, and the next morning, while I was in the garden, they packed their things and left. Quietly, without scandals, like thieves. The events of the following months flashed by in businesslike, almost emotionless bustle. Lawyer Andrew and Patricia took everything into their hands. The company liquidation process began. The audit revealed all their machinations. To avoid criminal prosecution, Richard had to agree to everything. The debt to financial guarantor was fully paid from his share of selling the business assets. After all payments and settlements, he and Jessica had almost nothing left. The car had to be sold. There was no talk of a new apartment. I heard from Patricia that they rented a tiny one-bedroom on the outskirts of town. Richard got a job as a simple driver at another transport company. Their life, built on my money and their lies, crumbled to dust. The house, my house, was also sold. I felt no regret. It had stopped being my home long before this. It had become just a building, a storage of bad memories. Buyers were found quickly, a young family with 2 children. Looking at them, I saw the house would be in good hands. All legal formalities were observed. A large educational fund was created for Tommy. The money in it was reliably protected, and no one except him, upon reaching 21, could touch it. I knew I had given him the most important gift, a chance for a future independent of his parents' mistakes. 3 months have passed. I stand on my small balcony. Below me spreads a small coastal town, drowning in the greenery of palm trees. And further, to the very horizon, the sea, endless, alive, breathing. The air here is different. It doesn't smell of apples from the garden or the dampness of an old house. It smells of salt, sun-warmed stones, and freedom. My apartment is small but bright. 2 rooms and a kitchen. I don't need more. The walls are painted the color of cream, and the sun, peeking through the windows in the mornings, floods everything with warm, honey light. There's no old bulky furniture here, storing memories of the past. Everything is new, light, simple. I place a bouquet of freshly cut wildflowers in a vase, which I bought today at the market from a local old woman. My movements are light, free from the burden of years of obligations. I no longer need to wake before dawn to feed the family. I don't need to count every penny to cover holes in someone else's budget. I don't need to flinch at the sound of steps behind the door. I make myself tea with thyme and sit in a wicker chair on the balcony. Next to me on the table lies a letter. The envelope is decorated with a clumsy child's hand. There's a sun, seagulls, and blue sea. This is a letter from Tommy. Patricia takes him to her place on weekends and helps us communicate. I unfold the sheet. Inside are several lines written in block letters, and another drawing. He drew me and himself. We're standing on the shore flying a kite. Grandma, hi, he writes. Everything's fine with me. I miss you very much. Mom and Dad fight all the time, but I try not to listen. I'm reading your space book. It's so interesting. When I grow up, I'll come live with you by the sea. We'll fly a kite every day. Love you, your Tommy. I fold the letter and press it to my chest. Tears stand in my eyes, but these aren't tears of grief or offense. These are tears of quiet, bright sadness and love. I know he'll come, and we'll definitely fly a kite. I look at the sea, at its endless, measured rhythm. Waves run onto the shore and retreat. Run up and retreat. Just like in life. Tides and low tides. My long, prolonged low tide has finally ended. I'm 72 years old. For some, this is old age, sunset. For me, it's dawn. The dawn of my own separate life, which I hadn't even dreamed of. A life where I belong only to myself, where every breath is filled not with anxiety but with peace. Where every day is not a sacrifice but a gift. The sun sets beyond the horizon, painting the sky in gentle watercolor tones. A light breeze carries from the boardwalk sounds of music and laughter. I smile. For the first time in many years, I smile not for someone else, but just because. For myself, for the new day, for the sea. For 72 years I built a house for my family. Finally, it's time to build a house for myself.